this program called Concerning Belonging, in which he had picked a few artists to work on a project with the community, particularly with children and adults who were experiencing period of transition and homelessness. At the same time, I wanted to do, here's Luke, I wanted to do a program called Research and Development, which would recognizing that artists, just like doctors and scientists and historians, need time to do research and development for the furthering of their practice. So rather than, and that we would give them gallery space in the museum as their studio in which they can conduct their research, and that they would have access to our professional staff, to NSU's incredible faculty. One of whom is here with us today, and two of them are with us today. So, and our other resources, as well as working with the community. And it was an experiment, you know, the idea that we were not installing finished works of art. We didn't even know what we were going to have in the end. It was a mystery. We weren't expecting, there was no requirement that the artists actually have a finished work at the end as a result of the research and development. The idea was to do the experiments for themselves, research for themselves, as well as engaging with the community. And I can say for a fact that it was a great success. I've had a lot of time with a number of the artists. Some of them couldn't make it today, but I think all of them have been documented during the period. So I thought, Luke, why don't you explain how the project started and introduce the artists?
Okay. The project started mostly in, I guess, offsite. The idea was to kind of merge art with a social issue. In this case, it was homelessness. And there were supposed to be a group of artists who would go to a homeless shelter and work directly with the people there. And one of them was Natasha, and the other two were Augustina Woodgate and Antonia Wright. And then it kind of got merged with something on site here at the museum, where people would be working inside the studios as well.
And how did what were the instructions for the project?
They were essentially just to use their skills and their backgrounds as professional artists and apply that to projects that they could do with the people at the shelter in order to get them to kind of either reflect on their past or think about their future in different ways, or even just think about what their present was and different ways to look at it.
Well, I know that a big thing that you were saying was...
because there's no amplification,
yeah.
Please.
Have a quiet
Talk
voice.
loud.
So a thing that Luke approached each of us artists that were conducting these workshops was the emphasis on therapy, correct? Like the art as a form of unofficial therapy. So I'm 100% a believer of that when anyone even just paints a line, it's like, yeah, I feel better, you know? So figuring that out was amazing too, because a lot of the people that we were working with are artists, and they were so creative.
So they were artists already.
A lot of them were already, actually. They had bodies of work too.
And did you do like collaborative projects that brought groups of people together?
Yeah. A few people helped each other with collages, and started collaborating too. And now they want to make a lot of their own work again.
And the idea was concerning belonging. Okay, was there the sense of creating a sense of belonging, of being part of community, being part of, and as well as the museum being part of the community?
I would say that this project gave a lot of the people who were creating works some sort of power to feel like, oh, I do have a voice. Someone's going to look at this? Wow. So they really worked hard. They came back every day and continued to work on their projects that they didn't finish the day before. So, because we kept reminding them this is for a museum show, not everyone gets a chance to ever in their life have a show in a museum. So, kind of like, hello, this is a big deal. Do some good work. And they were excited.
And there was a big opening for the projects, as well as the premiere of the film documenting the project. But yesterday we had something interesting happen in that while we were giving a tour to the staff from the Broward Community Foundation, which made major support for this event, for this program, we noticed in the gallery two people going through looking at the collages. And one of the staff from the foundation recognized the woman, was an older woman on a cane, as being one of the women in the film, the documentary. And it turned out she wasn't able to make it here the day that they had the big event. So her companion brought her over to see the show, and they were going from one collage to the other, and she was just beaming. And unfortunately, she had missed the film, the screening of the film when it was in our auditorium. But we had just screened it a few minutes earlier for the Broward Foundation, Community Foundation, and our educator offered to give her her own solo viewing of the film in our auditorium, and she was so happy. I didn't get to see her afterwards, but I'm sure she was thrilled. And that was one of the participants that you had worked with.
You told me.
Yeah.
We shared the same heart condition, so we made a collage together. That's the only person.
The heart is in both collages.
Yeah. So we
Oh.
connected that way. We're like, let's work on one together.
Oh my goodness. So she, because that's one of the things I pointed out. Yeah, that the heart was there. That's amazing. I didn't know that. Wow. So you bonded on
A lot of good people.
Yeah.
Everyone's a human.
Wow. So, and then Franky and Catalina sort of are here by
Magic?
by magic and by almost like default, because one of the artists that you picked to be in the show was Antonia Wright. And Antonia was, I guess, a very good studio in Miami. She thought it would be a great idea to sort of play it forward and invite two artists that she really liked that were currently without studios, which means basically homeless for an artist not to have a studio. And you both had the opportunity to sort of move right in and work. Can you tell us about that experience?
Now I feel really spoiled, and I need to get a huge studio now because there's no other way to do it. There's something about a space that kind of waits for you and is always ready. There was something about the experience of not installing works in an exhibition and for an exhibition, but being in the process of making, interacting with people, spending time with that wall that will never end, I guess. And it kind of affected my practice in a way that I didn't expect, because I usually do mostly installations and performance which require no studio, no rehearsing, no planning. So I think it like opened this whole other more hands-on, quieter aspect in my work.
That's interesting. So do you think that's something you'll continue in your work?
Yeah, now I'll have a mini studio in some room somewhere and make a mini wall. But yeah, definitely. There's even as a space where you can meet with people and discuss work and be surrounded by work, and the ideas are always there. You don't have to restart. You don't have to, I don't know, take out a bin with the acrylics and bring the brushes, and like it's always ready for you. And there's something about that that really shifts your perception.
That was good. And Franky, I think you sort of really moved right in.
I mean, not as much as
I know. If you could, you would have been here 24 hours a
yeah,
day.
you guys wouldn't be able to handle it probably, but it was very interesting actually to be on exhibition like that.
Yeah.
At first, it felt like a zoo creature.
And that led you by chance to finding
Find
a
this
book.
about the last Native American of America, the United States, which was very interesting. Where he lived in a museum.
Where was the museum?
I don't know. I'm not there in the book yet.
Oh.
I'm not there in the book. I think maybe in London.
Okay.
The anthropologists were from London. But I've actually paused reading it because it was a little sad. I moved on to other things, and I'll read it next week. I'll probably finish it.
Let us know.
But it was interesting to bring that into the dialogue because I was already doing things that relate to this ishi. So he actually made me feel normal and and calm. That I don't know. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be on exhibition, but usually I work in my private space.
Did that change any way that you
I mean,
work?
everything that happened in that studio in this building happened because it was in this building in this institution because I didn't have my private space and it was kind of like this where I approached it where I just all these things that got in the way of my natural practice and the things that I would have came into this place doing without if it wasn't for the barriers, the environment shapes. I react and adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening in that room or what was happening in that room happened only because of my situation at the moment and reacting and dancing with this space.
And what about, your space was still sort of, it was the people who came through, visitors came through, were respectful. I think they didn't come in unless they felt you actually.
Sometimes I was like,
No,
please.
Which was fine. We didn't plan that you would be artists in a zoo. The idea was to be able to do your work, and you could be as public or private as you wanted. But it's still in a public space, and you had to. Did people come in and ask you what you were doing?
I had a lot of dialogue with people.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a very beautiful thing, actually. I talked to families. This woman who wanted to start painting, and she's gonna take classes now after a conversation. I had a great conversation with some of the Nova students who we talked about microscopes and histology, which I want to connect with the histology lab at Nova and maybe look at some tissues under microscopes. Still, I want to continue that. So it was wonderful.
With nature too.
In my head.
Yeah.
In my head and the pieces I was doing before, but I can't. I'm not allowed to bring anything alive into the
Right.
zoo.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's right.
But
It attracts South Florida creatures.
I am a self.
You had the fake logs that were. You actually, in a way, did bring in nature. You brought in the fake logs that were lit. Fire, and then you had the fans that were creating the
Fire,
wind.
water,
You had all the
everything
elements
happening.
going in there, really. And you had a tent.
Well, that was because I don't have a private space of mine at the moment. I really don't, except for like my vehicle when I'm driving. So I needed a little kind of getaway, meditation
Did you go in there?
area. I did a lot, yeah.
Oh,
I took
that would
naps.
work.
I took naps. I took
You were
naps
going
in
back.
there. There's a lot happened in there.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I won't ask too much. But it was, and I was also trying to be respectful of all your time, and we made a date for me to actually come, and I was so impressed with the work, and especially it was a surprise since neither one of you were artists that were originally picked.
You guys did not know what you were getting into.
Well, that was the whole thing. This was supposed to be an experiment for the museum, and it worked out really great. I did know what I was going to get into with Tom, and it was really amazing. Every week you came up with another project. And how did it relate to the topic of concerning belonging?
Well, I was thinking of the institution itself. So Franky just brought up a good point about the idea of, well, what does it mean to have a studio within a museum? That's very different to, I guess, a typical place where an artist would have a studio. And it's kind of funny because a museum is a place where, I guess, kind of long-term art is, that's where art ends up, right? But then you have the studio as a site of production. That's like, I guess, conceptually where it begins. So it's kind of weird to have these two spaces fold in on themselves. So for me, how I approach the idea of having a studio space within the museum, I wanted to present finished works, and I wanted to treat the gallery as a gallery. I wanted to treat it as a museum. So I kind of came up with a scheme where essentially it was a piece a week, and I was working with. Aside from the first piece I presented in the gallery, all the objects that I used related to the museum, and they were all infrastructure related. So, for example, I used the boardroom table. It actually had a model, like an original architect's model of the museum placed on top of the boardroom table. So you could think about that in relationship to infrastructure as like, that's very much about the administration, right? So from an object like that or a piece like this to a 200-pound pile of sweeping compound that the museum uses to clean the floors, and it kind of read as this kind of like as a spill, so it's like a kind of a post-minimal sculpture. So in a way, another example would be I amplified the elevator machine room, and basically there was which was kind of annoying for you, I guess. Catalina was in the middle of an interview when I installed the piece. But basically, you had the museum PA system, which has a cordless mic, and it was placed in the elevator machine room. And every time the elevator was used, you would hear the elevator in the galleries. And so in a way, it was this kind of act of kind of turning the institution inside out. However, what also occurred, and it was kind of funny because it kind of got to a point with setting up that scheme of doing a piece a week that I couldn't kind of go wrong in a way. And I guess the biggest challenges I had were like formal considerations, like how to present objects, what's the best way for things to be read, all that kind of stuff. Just trying to, I guess, communicate these situations. However, what was really the biggest surprise out of that kind of initial scheme were these actions or these interventions that occurred outside of the studio. So I mentioned the elevator machine room kind of occurring in the gallery space, but I engaged there's a sculpture terrace that is rarely used. It's locked. I actually created a work outside on the sculpture terrace. I'm interested in the history and the conventions of sculpture, and I think there's a video piece actually down in the gallery by the windows, and that is a response to the notion of what a sculpture is, especially an outdoor sculpture. I actually used 5 gallons of chlorinated fountain water from opposite the museum, the park. There's a fountain there, and it was just. Excuse me. Yeah, exactly. And it was just very simple, kind of going back to the sweeping compound piece. It was just a simple gesture, and the video, and for me that was the sculpture in a way. It was like this thing occurring, but the first time I did it, it was incredible because the piece disappeared like within minutes, and so it kind of evolved with something like that. The gesture of a work like that, documentation is really kind of important. But then seeing that process, the work evolved into an actual video piece where it documents essentially the life cycle of this spill. I did a piece outside in the museum plaza that consisted of $21 worth of concrete pavers, 12 inches by 12 inches, that indexed the rental, the real estate rental costs of the offices that are connected to the plaza, and it was just a simple stack of concrete pavers.
One of the things about your projects that I felt actually had a big impact on me is how you, first of all, in most cases it was peripheral. I mean, how it goes back to the concept of the concerning belonging and dealing with the issue of homelessness and you almost always used a periphery. You never had labels, so it was never clear that these interventions were works. And you even got me once with and I think they're really effective after I realized it was a work. The benches downstairs in the lobby with the packing pads on it. Very simple. They're just our regular benches down there. Is modular, very minimal looking, and on each one has our black, what we use for shipping or for padding artwork. Just these quilted pads that were perfectly folded and laid on top of each one. And the first time I saw it was just before we were opening the Miami Generation show, and I said, "What are all these things still doing out here?" And I grabbed them, and someone said, "That's Tom's work." And I put it back. And then I should have the neatly folded should have been the key. I don't think our crew was that neat. But then when I realized how brilliant it was, first of all, it was something we were just overlooking, but that you kept using materials. The ingenuity of using materials that existed, which is something that we also find with people who are creating makeshift shelters for themselves and places to sleep, like the blankets. But then the minimal benches became personages. I mean, they became a surrogate person in themselves. And then formally it related to the Frank Stella painting that's on the wall, the big bright minimal painting on the wall. Frank Stella, that just before that series, was famous for these black paintings that had very thin white stripes in them, just geometric form. And the blankets themselves have that inherent design as well. And then the way the benches are arranged, modularly, minimally, also was a reference to minimal sculpture and painting. So to me, it worked on so many levels, and it's still there. The other one that had a big impact on me and anyone I think that we've talked to about was the neon sign. You want to talk about that? It's now changed out, but the original neon sign.
So the original neon sign was a quote taken from a recent ordinance that was passed by the city, and it was basically a prohibition of storing personal belongings on private property. And yeah, I'm sorry. And the reasoning and the rationale they gave was the interest in aesthetics, and and that was actually something that was quoted in numerous newspapers as well. And it just seemed like incredible that was seen as a kind of as logic or rationale for this ordinance. I thought it was kind of interesting that, in a way, like I have an interest in aesthetics. The institute, that this museum has an interest in aesthetics. So I wanted to somehow kind of use that statement. And then I was thinking about this idea of like public space, of communicating within public space, and obviously neon is ubiquitous in regards to text and communicating in a public space, but in relationship to kind of like a very urban commercial kind of setting. And the color, what was really interesting about that project was when I was doing some research, I found a neon company online, and they had this kind of generic template, and basically I typed in the 3 words. It was like a 3-word template, like 3 lines, like a word per line. And what was crazy was, like, I just typed it in and it just gave me this interest in aesthetics, and it came out red, white, and blue. Which also kind of, I think, references neons, because if you look at neons, they're colors that, I think are ubiquitous within, like, it's a ubiquitous kind of palette. So now I've just done a new piece, and for me, I see this new piece as a kind of like, as a conceptual painting in a way. So when I say that, this piece downstairs it's the same color scheme as the red, white, and blue, but the words are switched. So red says white, blue, I guess you get what I'm getting at, right? So there's a kind of an abstraction that's happening there. And so for me, doing the second piece, functions as functions as a kind of as a recurrence, as a kind of a double take. But again, I see it on a very formal level. So early this year, I remember coming across like a statement in a textbook, really simple, but it just resonated. Color is contextual. Now that statement was in relationship to painting, and Joseph Albers and the square within the different squares within each other, and how these colors related to each other. And it's funny because when I first read that statement, color is contextual. For me, like I think of context like everything outside of the frame, like this notion of periphery. But then to think about the inside of something seemed really interesting. So I think the current piece, you know, it functions as this kind of as an autonomous work. But then I think it talks about like expanded institutions, right? It talks beyond the museum, beyond the city, you know, like kind of nationwide in a way.
What's interesting, you use periphery. Antonia and Augustina tended towards the invisible, also as a kind of metaphor. Can you talk about some of the projects you did, Augustina?
Yeah.
Thank you for. I know you just got off the plane, so thank you for joining us.
I know. I have worked in 2 projects for concerning belonging. One, 2 actually very relate to each other, to a video that I saw that I mentioned the first time that was inspired. The video is a campaign for homelessness awareness, and in the video, certain subjects are invited to be part of this sort of research, right? And so basically all they have to do is walk from one place to another place, from point B to point A. And in this path that they're walking down the streets, they don't know, but there are people laying down, homeless people laying down in the streets. And there's a hidden camera documenting these subjects doing this path. And then they show this video to these people. And in this video, the subjects discover that the people that were laying down in the streets were actually their family. So one is the wife of this guy, and so
That's powerful.
It was very inspiring for me but I thought it was a very effective campaign.
And what was the reaction to the people once they realized it was the family?
They couldn't believe that they hadn't even turned around to look, that actually to really look, that who was there in the ground was his wife or her daughter or her brother, whatever. They were choosing very close relationships too. So that inspired a lot, part of the works that I brought specifically on this idea of the invisible, on how the denial makes this shield on almost an accepting or the responsibility that we take or we don't take just by not looking. And I had the opportunity to work at the Collision Center here at the Broward Community Homeless Center that's very close by. So a lot of these ideas of invisible and the line between what we know and what we don't know, right, is what I brought. But also to the Collision Center and offered workshops there. The workshops were done in collaboration with Tasha in a very collaborative way. And instead of setting up in a classroom and creating a situation of a workshop as a teaching environment as we know it, again, this idea of blending the boundaries, we set up our workshops. I don't know if you explained this before. We set up our workshops in the courtyard and just started working.
You would just start working yourself.
Yeah, we just set up in the courtyard, in the gardens, and it was really nice also because each one of us was doing a different project, but already was 2 of us working, and that was enough to capture the curiosity of the people living at the center to come and ask, what are you doing? And so that was a very nice way of integrating instead of putting ourselves in a place of authority of we're going to teach everybody something. It was more about, we're here to work. You guys want to work with us? So it was very, very cool. It really set up the tone of a collaboration because we were already collaborating between us, and then
we were foreigners in their home. This is all where everyone is staying. So we talked about it for a while. We're like, let's also get them coffees, little cortaditos too. So if you come hang out with us, have a coffee with us.
It became a whole social,
very
cell phones or whatever for music, but it was completely casual, and we all talked about just getting to know each other.
See, so that helped us a lot also to break this barrier of the indifference and the equality, in a way, just put ourselves in. It's just like you said, we're entering their home. Even if it's temporary, it's their home. And in my case, my project, where I extended it up one of my bodies of work that is called New Landscapes, where I sand away the surface of maps and globes. So I had gotten this very large map of the world in hemispheres. So there's 2 very large circles, and it's hanging on the 2nd floor now. So I extended this in the big table and started sanding alone. This type of work is a work that collaboration is required almost, because after so many hours, the hand starts to hurt. So it's nice because really it's a group effort to erase it all. Especially in only certain amount of, we had a schedule, right? So I started sanding, and after an hour, I already had one person sanding with me, and by the end of the sessions, there was 8 people completely invested on erasing everything and letting it work.
Day too. Yeah. More to go.
They were waiting, and it became their goal to really erase it all. But what was more surprising, and the lesson for me, was that in my work, I erase the surfaces, and that's my work. I end there. And as an artist, I expect the audience to complete it, or to,
complete it in their
imagination, or open up the conversation. Some audiences, some people, some viewers look at it as tragic. Some other ones look at it as hopeful. Anything, it's welcome. Now in this case, and I collect the dust, and I produce work with the dust. That's me. But when I bring this to them, the conversation was them being incredibly attached to what they were erasing. This is our past. Why are we erasing our culture? It's our tradition. And it started to be, it's another generation of people that were staying there, a lot older than me. And so maybe their importance, and they were assessing other things, where for me, maybe it's a political and economical conversation, the division of the world in different countries. For them, it was more tradition, languages, their music, their family, their religion, other things that were incredibly important, and they were so attached they wouldn't want to erase it.
Really? So like if they found their city,
they wouldn't
want to erase it.
Exactly, or let's keep Jamaica for the last, and there was all this other
I would just leave Jamaica on the map, that's it, okay.
So, but that was incredibly important for me as an artist to understand that this genuinely was a collaboration, and to put myself aside and allow them to have a voice in this work. So I set up a set of rules. We're going to erase it, but they weren't buying it. Why? So once we sort of understood, or through conversation, started talking about the idea of the maps being outdated and this and that, and the idea of the border, the idea of the migration, the idea of the sphere, of the circle. Also, these are two hemispheres. So the conversation also went back to very formal shapes and forms. And then the concern was, how are we going to fill it in? Which, that's when I really needed it to remove myself, because their concern and their initiative and the will to keep on erasing was because they knew now they had the voice to fill the white.
I'm sorry, what?
To fill in the whites.
Oh, so they wanted to work on
They
it after
wanted
it was erased.
Now they were only erasing in order to
Make something
fill the
new.
white.
Okay.
Which, that's when I mean that I had to let myself aside, because I leave it in the white. Conceptually, I am choosing that white. Now they were not, they were actually working and erasing it in order to complete it. So the erasing became the thing that they needed it to get done, and they couldn't stop because they just wanted it to start filling it in. And so the conversation was, while we were sanding and erasing, was, how is this going to be filled in?
That's interesting.
And a lot of conversations started happening, and in very collaborative ways, because also now this was a process that they were invested for many hours. Many hours, and they started to tender the surface, teaching each other, mastering the tools, and something happened in the middle. This one gentleman insisted on documenting the past, insisted on taking pictures of the map before it got erased, and in every stage. So instead, I brought a GoPro camera with a headband, and I told them, why don't we document it as we go? And we will document our hands erasing these, but that way there's always a constant documentation of what we've been erasing, so we're not forgetting our past. It's because there was this fear of, we don't want to forget. And so that is that part, but they were still wondering, how are we going to fill this white? So we started making a list of all the ideas. Some of them wanted it to write something like a slogan, or they were calling it slogan. And then the other ones were like, but we're not writers, we need to hire a poet, and we don't really know how to write so well. So they had these grandiose ideas, until this one gentleman said, well, we are removing the ink, and the ink is the only thing that is synthetic, because the paper represents the trees. And that's what we are seeing, is just the the paper without varnish, without any protection after it's sanded. It's just very fragile. Why don't we fill it in with vegetables that we collect from our courtyard? So basically what ended up happening was they went on a scouting of flowers and soil and ashes and all sorts of things that they could find in their own courtyard, and with the same action that they had erased by rubbing, they pressed the flowers so hard against the paper that the pigment started tainting the paper. And it was such an experimentation for all of us, even for myself. We were kind of like 2 years old back again, rubbing, that it was never in the conversation of all of us, or in our minds, I think, how we were going to apply the color. The point was to extract color from these vegetables. So that also produced a very somehow naive and more expressive result, where the gesture of the rubbing is incredibly visible, and no one was really wondering, oh, let's put more blue over there or more blue. It wasn't a formal, such a composition type of conversation. It was more on this rubbing and trying to get the color out of these things.
And that's downstairs.
That
you
is,
could see it on the second floor
Yeah.
in your space. Well, it's interesting. I mean, thinking of all these people spending all this time first erasing and now putting the color back with the rubbing. it goes, I mean, I'm just sitting here and thinking, why do we make art, in the face of all the things that we could be doing, productive, constructive? Why, I mean, that gesture sounds, like obsessive, and you end up saying, well, why would someone spend all that time doing it? But you could say that about any artist. Why are they spending all this time doing what they're doing? And I think, Luke, that must have been why you wanted to do this in the first place, is show the role that art plays in society. I mean, is this, and you talk about your reasoning for doing the Concerning Belonging and what you hoped to achieve with it.
I guess my reasoning was, that one, like art can make a difference in society, or art does make a difference in society. If you think about, that drawing, if that drawing can give someone emotion, then you could expand upon that and say, what type of emotion could it give? And if something gives you emotion, then could it give you a point of reference for reflection? Yeah, why not, right? So art can take something a step further, definitely. I guess what I wanted to get out of the project was, I don't know what, I have no idea.
Are you satisfied?
Am I satisfied? I think it's a really, everyone approached it in such a different way that I am satisfied because of that. If everyone tried to do exactly the same thing, I don't know how successful it would be. But just because there's so many different ways to approach such a big topic with such another big topic, or or medium, or whatever, that if everything wasn't different, then it would have been an issue.
Well, I know we have a number of non-artists in the audience, and it'd be interesting to hear your reflections on what you've just heard with the artists and what they've gone through, how it changed them, and how literally the chemistry, working with the residents at the Broward workshop. Does we've been talking up here. Does anybody have any questions about the project?
What about Ulysse, the other artist that was?
Unfortunately, he
do you know
couldn't.
anything about how his work, like he got out of it?
Unfortunately, you couldn't make it today. But you've all been talking to Rick. What is your, I know my take on it. I've worked with Rick for a long time, and I know he had a sense of not only belonging here, but as someone who's just recently back in South Florida. He grew up here, but went away to school. Part of what he got out of it was getting to know all of you as artists and creating a community for himself of artists. So that's one of the things I know he got. Any of you have any other sense of having worked with Rick? What since he's not here, what would he say?
What would he say?
I actually had a kind of a long conversation with him on Thursday night. We're just talking about this notion of kind of productivity, having the studio, what does that mean? And then he said, oh, well, I'm just finishing the Bible. So apparently he's like, over the past couple of months, he's been reading the Bible, which just sounds like, I don't know, this notion of kind of research. It sounds crazy in lots of ways, right? But this idea of kind of dedicating himself to kind of reading, this significant text, I think is really interesting. He has that one piece downstairs. There's a drawing, I think, of slippers or flip-flops. I think my apostles, it says underneath. And what's really been interesting, how I've been just looking at the studio spaces of the other artists in the show. It's just obviously these different approaches, but I was thinking about today, but this sense of kind of spirituality, and I think just talking with Rick, and him reading the Bible, and I think Franky, you're interested in spirituality. Is that? No, I don't want to speak.
It's a personal thing. Mysticism.
Yeah, all of the above.
Yeah.
I have questions on a lot of subjects, and I think whether you approach it from a spiritual perspective or a scientific perspective, I think it's all the same thing. But it's just like we're just trying to figure out, you know, I mean, whether we're colliding like atoms in a big thing, or we're eating mushrooms, like we're or reading the Bible, like just trying to figure these things out.
But you know, as another side thought, like, you know, when I was thinking about this today, I was thinking about, okay, well, you know, like in spirituality, this notion of kind of poverty can actually be an affirmative thing, and you know, and that's through multiple religions, right? So that, I don't know, that, because I think I'm a very material-based artist, so that just seemed really interesting as, I guess, an observation.
I know we had a number of guards who spent a lot of time talking to Rick, and I think they're going to miss him because just think of, you know, the typical day for most security guards in a museum is looking at things that don't talk back or you can't talk to, and or ask, why are you the way you are? And here he was able, you know, I know particularly one guard who took advantage of the opportunity of asking the artist, what are you doing and why? And, you know, and I know he found it really fascinating and got a lot of insight into this work that's mostly conceptual, more conceptual than formal, although there's a formal aspect of it. So again, from my point of view, you know, building a community among the artists, building a community among our visitors, our university, and the residents in the shelter was all part of what I saw this project doing, and staff as well. I mean, I think our staff became very much involved with the project, and I think, Tom, you said the first day, our chief, the chief installer, builder, Eddie, said, "We're here for you."
Which was, you know, I was really surprised by that, and I thought it was that was really important. And even he's actually giving a talk on Tuesday.
A really interesting talk. We have roundtable discussions once a month on Tuesdays at lunch, and Eddie's talking about this kind of mythological, almost the Don Quixote of Cuba, the Caballero. In fact, Mindy at the Children's Museum has I believe you have Pablo Cano's marionette of the Caballero. Right. So this is. So this will be very interesting to come in here. We have fascinating staff, I have to say, and Eddie's going to be talking about this sort of, you know, mythological. He was a real person, but he was basically homeless, but he inspired poets and artists. So I welcome you all to come to that as well. Any of the NSU multidisciplinary students or faculty have any observations?
Yeah, I'd like to say I like the collaborative effect of this whole project with giving studio space, the whole idea of belonging. What I find was interesting is some of the artists, how you were talking about Tom's work, sort of working around the periphery, and I saw that with the chains around the room, which sort of, to me, speaks about the same thing that some of you were saying about we don't see homeless people, they're sort of on the periphery. But what I sort of liked was how each artist took their own take on it, where you seem to stay very much in the museum, using the elements of the museum in your work in a very, in almost like in one encapsulated idea, where you both went out and worked with the homeless in the community, almost sort of expanding. I'm sort of seeing where the way that how you see art, there was different levels of collaboration, which I find really interesting. And I guess I'd like to know how all of you together also, how it's changed your perspective through collaborating with each other.
It's been pretty amazing in a weird way to just have conversations with each person about their process here, and to just help each other out with some resources that one person figured out. Oh, you know, go this way, you won't get locked out. You know, simple things like that, or go
Have
this,
us subvert a stay later than
just,
our
like,
hours.
It's well, not locked out like that, but I go walk this way, or simple, just trying to figure out a space together, and then it bonded us, and we started actually collaborating sometimes when we were here at the same time and working with each other, and then it was just really refreshing to work with not the usual people we work with, or in solitude.
I also think that
That
the
happened.
framework, the umbrella of the exhibition being called Concerning Belonging was and put us all in a very sensitive and sensible and generous position where we could be the one displacing another. And we are all together under the same umbrella of the same exhibition. So if you are part of that exhibition, possibly it's because you are believing what you are doing, right? Which already puts in your mind the idea of not displacing and paying attention to your surroundings and the others, not only the way we did when we decided to enter the courtyard and just work in that way of boundaries, but also within us when we selected our spaces, the spaces weren't given. That was just a very fluent, organic conversation that happened between us. We were brought into the space and said, choose whatever you want. But we weren't brought all at the same time. So that already created a conversation of a place of respect and generosity and coherence between each other's needs genuinely in a generous way, because if we couldn't behave like that, then how are we going to talk about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was a whole social experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Best way to describe it.
And you know, there's a kind of conceptual art that emerged in the early 90s and still dominates the art world, and it's called relational aesthetics. A critic in France coined the word, the artist didn't call it. But it's about that the work isn't the object, but it's the social relationship that comes out of the object or the activity. And basically, that's what this has been, is a whole experiment in relational aesthetics. So are there any other questions? I know that you've been involved from the multidisciplinary as well. MNSU?
So just for the recording purpose and for all of you, the audience, my name is Naz Ozaki. I am a full-time student at Nova Southeastern University, and I coordinate community resolution services. We collaborate, we partnership with local agencies in terms of mediation, presentation, workshop, and whatnot. And Dr. McKay, who is a chair of CRS, got us involved partially with the workshop component of this exhibition, and I had such a fortunate opportunity to discuss, to plan things out in terms of how we wanted to approach this workshop without perpetuating the dynamics that's happening between society and the homeless people. And that's, I guess that's how we decided to, okay, so why don't we just start working on our own and see what happens. And that's exactly what happened. People got curious about what we are doing, and some of them may have become an artist in the process. Yeah. And in account to that, I happened to see a couple of residents who were working on the workshop at the opening of this exhibition a couple of weeks ago. And one of the lady I was talking to, she told me that now I am an artist. And I mean, that to me was such a huge I mean, to know that this project made such an impact for that person to have the identity as an artist, I think it's a quite incredible impact. So that's what comes to me.
NAS has been incredibly helpful for us when we started doing the workshops. Maybe we get the part right that we are artists, but we don't know a lot about social practice. And NAS is a professional, and for us it was very important to recognize that we also needed it to learn, although we were going there to teach, but we didn't really know how to, because it's such a sensitive place. And there are so many other things to consider, and the people that are living there are not crazy, are not ill, they don't have a house. So that's just it. And I read a very interesting quote that said, being homeless is not a consequence, it's a process, which was very helpful also, and it only brought us more together, and also to have Nas in the team and sort of coach us how to coach was incredibly helpful also, because then we were really going into the shelters at the same level where we were open to learn more than open to teach. So that was very nice.
Well, I have to say, I am so excited about this program, so touched by what I've heard here. And the whole idea of being able to do research and development on this particular topic, to have access to NSU's professional staff and students and faculty to help guide us for the quality of the program and for the success of the program, and to have incredible staff at the museum that really care and want the museum and the art and the artists to matter. And I think that we did a lot to build community with this. And there's a lot going on at the museum today. We could go down and look at the projects. Tomorrow is the last day of the show, or the project, but it's not really an exhibition, but you should see the projects that we've been talking about. There's also the film. How can people see the film?
It's by the window as well, as well as Tom's piece, Tom's video.
And it'll be on our website as well.
It's on the website right now, actually.
We're building a new website. It'll be much better soon. But you can see that. And then we have a whole program going on with hip hop downstairs as it relates to our exhibition, When the Stars Begin to Fall, the exhibition that was organized by the Studio Museum in Harlem. It's on our second floor. So lots going on here. And then we're getting ready for our first big show of the season of Cafe Dolly, Picabia, Schnabel, and Williamson, which opens on the 11th with, on the 12th, a talk with Julian Schnabel. So lots going on. Thank you all. I mean, I'm just blown away by what you did, and I know that we're going to continue working together on a lot of projects. And thank you, Luke, for all you did to coordinate this.